We often get comments about the cost of a tiny home, and I get it. Some of our tiny homes cost more than my first house did, and I'm not even that old. And even more recently, when we started building the Millennial, our first tiny home, and we started planning that and budgeting, it was a lot more expensive than even I anticipated. What do we learn from that? Smaller does not necessarily mean that much cheaper. You can't go by square footage cost. So we're going to get more into that in a minute.
My biggest takeaway from the experience is that you can't build a tiny home for $60,000 and expect it to be solid or up to Ontario Building Code. And what really surprises me the most is that people who know more about tiny homes have been really impressed with pricing, but people who don't have much knowledge about tiny homes are the people who are like, oh, I could have knocked that out for 40 grand.
Yeah, or finished it in a week.
Right, right. It's those kinds of comments that I expected, but I didn't expect the amount of that feedback to come back, of people who just think they know and they want to know, but they just don't.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. So welcome to my world. Throughout the rest of North America, a lot of people are building tiny homes to RV standards or mobile home standards. And even taking that comparison of building to an RV standard as a tiny home or building an RV is still very different. A lot of RVs that you buy off of a lot have a lot of plastic walls, vinyl walls, just cheaper materials that are being used in some of that stuff, and less insulation, aluminum framing, and the fact that they build thousands upon thousands of them, and they're all built, a lot of it, by a machine. And when we start incorporating how tiny homes are built, and everyone's a little bit different than another one, and even the people that build the models over and over again are using much better materials and making it much more four-season livable. So some of that stuff is driving up the cost. Another great thing to note about all the shows on HGTV and a lot of the stuff on Netflix is that it's US dollars. So when we talk about the dollars of our tiny homes at True North Tiny Homes, we're talking about Canadian dollars. So when you take that comparison, all of a sudden it looks like ours costs a lot more, but the US dollar is just so much more expensive. So when you actually take the comparison in the same currency, we're very much on par with how the rest of the tiny home builders, the good ones in North America, are. And that still points back to the fact that tiny homes in general cost a little bit more than RVs and mobile homes. Now, there are some newer mobile home lines that are very nice. And there are, of course, mobile homes that have the motor attached to them. The RV is drivable instead of just a trailer. Those also cost a lot more, both of those scenarios, than even what tiny home builders are selling their tiny homes for. Now, when we get into True North Tiny Homes specifically, we're building a little bit differently because we're in Ontario than a lot of the rest of North America. And as I've mentioned before, we're building to the Ontario Building Code as much as possible. So those people who are building cottages, such as a builder we started recently, that doesn't 100% meet Ontario Building Code, but as much as possible. When we are doing a legalized actual house, though, everything is 100% meeting the Ontario Building Code. And so that means bigger room sizes, 2x6 walls, more insulation, exterior cladding that has more insulation in it. And there's a lot of extra stuff that we have to do to meet those codes. The other thing that we do is every single system that we do is engineered. So the heating system is engineered to prove that it heats, and that's how we can meet the Ontario Building Code. The insulation system is engineered to say, yes, this is good. The structural system is engineered to say, yes, this will stand up. So just the fact of doing the engineering costs a little bit of extra money, but it also gets you that peace of mind that this is something that's going to last. This is built properly. What we see a lot of people doing, and what is getting a lot of the municipalities kind of uptight about the legalities and the regulations surrounding tiny homes, is all the do-it-yourselfers that have done it in the past. And I'm not against do-it-yourselfers. You can still do a great job, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, about how we can help you do a good job. But there's some do-it-yourselfers that have been out there that have no building experience and no design experience whatsoever, and they start putting a house together. how safe is that house in the end? And that's the question. They might be very safe, but it's still questionable because no one has proved it. And so we're going about a lot of extra steps to make sure that this is proved so that you can take a CSA approved, Ontario Building Code compliant tiny home and you can move it from municipality to municipality and even province to province and say, hey, this meets the code, it's good to go, I can put this anywhere and legalize it. One of the big realizations that I've had in tiny home building is that it just costs a certain amount to build a system. And what I mean by that is a structural system. 4 walls, a floor, and a roof. And it doesn't matter how far apart those walls are, you're still building these 2 walls and these 2 walls. And it doesn't matter how far apart your roof and your floor are, you're still building a floor and you're still building a roof. And it doesn't matter how long that joist is, you're still putting the joist in. And so it's building that system that costs the money. You just have just as many windows often, they're just farther apart or closer together than in a regular larger house. We still have a heating system. We can only go so small in the size of a boiler. So we're using the same size boiler that could be in a small house. We have, like I said, just as many windows. We still have a electrical system. We still need to put an electrical panel in the wall and connect it to a system. So, and that's not even talking about solar yet. Just the length of the wires from that panel to the light is a little bit shorter. We still have a kitchen. It still has just as many appliances in it. You can see my imaginary appliances in here because they're not installed yet. But the fact is we still have to buy appliances. And guess what? The smaller appliances that we use in a tiny home cost more than the regular size appliances we put in a larger home. So all of these systems still have to be created. And that cost of buying those systems still exists. The plumbing in the bathroom is another one. We still have a full bathroom. And if you talk about going off grid, you have all kinds of extra systems. A separate composting toilet is about $2,000, whereas I can buy a regular flushing toilet from Home Depot for $200. So depending on the systems that we're putting in, it really skyrockets the price. And again, it has no difference on how far apart these things are from each other. You still have to buy them. Now the next thing that comes into play is that installation cost. That's the labor. Labor has gone far up in the last few decades. Since I bought my first home, regular house on a property, labor has gone up. And people will say, yes, it hasn't gone up as much as housing prices, but we're not even talking about the astronomical cost of housing prices. And remember, a tiny home compared to actual housing prices is very affordable in comparison now. But when we're talking about labor charges, our housing has gone up about the same as the labor charges has. So labor can account for 33% or more of the cost of the home. So at Turner Tiny Homes, we actually offer the service of helping you do it yourself. And we'll build to 4 distinct stages and let you finish it yourself. So the first one we call the bronze package. And that is where we just assemble all of the materials together and put it on the trailer. And then we ship it to you with an instruction manual on how to put it together. And it's all based on the design that we came up with you, so you know what you want, you know what you're getting, and this huge instruction manual on exactly how to put it all together. And of course, we're there for help along the way as well. So that's bronze. Platinum is at the other end, and that's where we just finish everything, including the furniture and the appliance installation, and then ship it to you finished. But the other 2 in between, silver and gold, are at different stages of finishes, and we finish it to a certain point and then send it to you. So maybe we finish the structural elements that you're uncomfortable with. We ship it to you and say, look, this is going to stay and stand up for a very long time. Go nuts in putting all the finishes in together. But we can also finish it to the stage where all the systems are roughed in. So the plumbing and the electrical, that sort of, and the in-floor heating, that sort of thing. And then you can just do all the finishes after that yourself. And again, we can ship it with the materials already purchased, and you're just literally providing the elbow grease to put it all together, or you can start searching for your own materials. But this is a great way to reduce that cost even just a little bit more. And we would love to talk more about that if you would contact us and go through our workshops to develop all of that. Now, the last thing that makes this more or less cost effective for people is the financing part of it. So buying a $500,000 home and putting 20% down would be $100,000, and that's required. But buying a $100,000 tiny home and putting 100% down because you can't get financing, you still require the same $100,000, and all of a sudden that doesn't sound as affordable. And this is kind of a gray area and a tricky area, and it's changing all the time, but getting financing will make this quite a bit more cost effective. We can finance one home at a time, and when that one's done being financed, we can finance another one. And as time goes on, we should be able to do more of this. That's in-house. But we also are trying to build relationships with banks and credit unions and mortgage brokers to try to get this out there and available. And one of their problems is that there's not enough data on the resale value of a tiny home. And they always look at worst case scenarios. So if you buy this tiny home and you get a mortgage on it, and you default on the mortgage and the mortgage company takes it back, and they now have to sell it to somebody else because they don't want a home, they want to finance money. So they need to sell this to somebody else. How much can they sell it for? They have no idea. There's not enough data. And because they don't know that worst case scenario end game, they're scared to start with the start game of the financing to begin with. And so it's really trying to build these relationships with these financial institutions or even private lenders in trying to make this more of a thing. And the more people that ask their mortgage brokers and ask their banks on how to do this, the more likely we can get this passed, because the more interest that's there, the more likely that they're going to start doing it because they can make money off of it. Now, some of the top 5 banks in Canada are providing what we would call a chattel loan. And I have not had any of our clients have success with this yet, but there are a few of them that are trying to go through the process. And a chattel loan is a loan that's based on a piece of physical equipment that is worth a value. So typically that would be an RV loan or a boat loan, and people call them RV loans and boat loans, but it's actually called a chattel loan. So a tiny home fits under a similar situation. Again, they have this problem with the worst case scenario end game, and we are still trying to get around that. But some banks have expressed interest in actually loaning on that chattel loan. That's all going to be on approved credit, of course. So talk to your financial institution, and again, even if they say no, the more people that ask, the more people in this movement that keep pushing it, the more likely it's going to happen in the future. A thing to note about putting two of these solutions together is the fact that we're building to the Ontario Building Code so that you can legalize a house, and a financial institution can see that other houses have been sold. They're more likely to lend on something like that. So keep in mind, when you do the do-it-yourself at the end, your house does not get a CSA stamp of approval. And that's because we have to build the entire thing in our factory to do that. And there are some loopholes that we can work with you on helping us to finish your tiny home while it's still within our factory and going through the accreditation process. And so that's another way around that. But having an OBC compliant, CSA approved tiny home on a piece of property is much more likely to be approved by a bank for financing. So interesting note, if you buy a piece of property and just put a tiny home on it and you get a proper building permit and the city inspectors review everything, that's very easy to get financing on because you have one building, one house on one piece of property. Great idea, but now of course it's not as affordable for some people because you also have to buy the property. But an interesting thing to keep in mind. It's when we get 2 buildings on one piece of property and you're trying to get mortgages on 2 different buildings that it becomes kind of tricky. And that's how tiny homes are fitting in mostly in Ontario right now. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you learned a little bit more about why tiny homes cost what they do and the value that you're actually getting out of it and some of the solutions on how to help you pay for that. Remember, I'm Daniel Ott, and this is Upsize Down, where we turn housing on its head.